So the purpose of this video is to help you work on your go and no-go project. So whether you're using brass, whether you're using aluminum, the goal of your project is to have a piece that goes into the go and doesn't go into the no-go. It won't go in here. So you're going to look at your two dimensions here of 437 and 422. And so you're going to have to machine your piece down to fit these parameters. So we're going to let students then decide, what do I need to machine my piece down in order to make that happen? So what we want to do is we want to start off with your raw stock. And whether it's brass or aluminum, we've got a very rough edge here. So the first thing that we need to do is to do a facing cut on here. So into the chuck. So remember we talked about that chuck key being something that's part of your hand. Now I want to make sure that I've got all three of my chuck jaws tightened around on this. And I want to make sure that I'm at least halfway in to my chuck. I don't want to just hold my piece out here because then we get what's called deflection. So I'm going to go in about halfway. Now if you have a longer piece you can put it in more than halfway. And remember we're going to tighten all three jaws of that chuck. So it's nice and tight, and then we're going to close our chuck. Now right now I've got this cutting head to perform a cut against this part, but I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I'm doing my facing cut. So in order to do my facing cut, I need to change this. So this is what I'm going to loosen. And you can see this spins very easily. So I'm going to spin it. And what I really need, it doesn't have to be at 90 degrees here. It just needs to be so that the tip of this cutter is going to be facing this. So I can go ahead and stop mine right there. This doesn't have to be at a 90 degree stop. So then I'm going to tighten that back down. And you don't need to wail on it, but you got to put a little force on it. So now I'm going to wheel this in the Y direction so that I'm lined up right in front of my part. But I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to ever touch my workpiece with a cutting head unless my machine is running. So what my goal here is, if I get a focus on this. Good. What my goal here is to go ahead and touch, and I can use the wheel that's on the back of the carriage. There's a wheel that moves it in and out, and I can also use the wheel down here. So for me, using this wheel that's on the back of the carriage is just as easy as it's just an easier way to do it. So I'm not using this wheel, but I can. So I'm going to touch, and then I'm going to move off, and we'll get it started like that. So I'm going to turn on my machine. Remember, your directions are on the wall in case you forget. So now I'm going to do my touch. Move up. And then I'm going to take 10 thousandths. Take another 10 just to make sure I got it all. Let's see how I did. So what I'm really looking for here is I'm looking to see that there's none of those rough cuts from my bandsaw. I should see just a line of rings inside there, and I do. So now I know that I've got my facing cut completely done. And now that my facing cut is done, now I need to start machining this down. So let's talk about what that looks like. I'm going to move it back away so I can loosen it up without being too close to that cutting head. And then I'm going to turn it so that I've got this running, it's going to be, so it's pointing at the side here. So this does happen to be at that 90-degree stop. I'm going to tighten it back up. Again, I don't need to wail on it, but it needs to be tight because you don't want anything coming loose when you're machining. So now I need to position my cutting head so that I can touch here. So many students think, well, I have to make it touch on the very edge, but that's not true. Anywhere inside this zone is acceptable. So I'm going to go ahead and get it to touch right there. And then that's when I can start machining this down. So I'm going to get up and spinning, and we'll show how to get a touch, and then how to move it off, and then how to machine it down. So I'm going to get up and spinning at 600. It's a little shaky on that camera, isn't it? Well, what if I do this? I'm going to try and... Here we go. So I'm going to move this until I get a touch. And I got a touch, I can see that line. So now I'm going to move off. And then I'm going to set my wheel here 10 thousandths more. So I'm going to actually set it to 0. Now it's at 0, and I'm going to move 10 thousandths forward, and then I'm going to use my auto feed lever. So now that I've got everything set up, I want to take my camera off and show you what the auto feed lever is. The auto feed is down here. So this is my auto feed. And when I push this down, and it won't engage, it's going to run this machine very slightly. It's going to move this cutting head in this direction, in the X direction. So this is my auto feed, not this one, but this one, and it's going to go down to engage. So I'm going to use the auto feed feature on this machine to make my cut as smooth as possible. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to get back up and spinning. I've already set 10 thousandths in my Y direction. Now I'm going to engage the auto feed. Sometimes you just have to wiggle it. So it's moving very slowly. My hands are not touching the machine. The auto feed by pulling the lever, and then I'm going to backtrack real nice and gentle. So that's how you take a pass. So now I've taken off material. What I need to do is figure out with my dial caliper is where it's at, and this is how I take a reading. I squeeze my dial caliper together, and I hold it there. So it's right where it should be, and then I'm going to tighten this screw. And that's a lock screw, so now I can get an accurate measurement about where I am, and then where I need to go. Because you're going to have to figure out, and you don't need to take off this whole thing. You don't need to take off all the way to the jaws. You really just need to take enough off to where it can go inside the plug. So you only need to take off about 1 inch. So we're going to continue this process and keep on machining this down until you've got the right amount taken off. But remember, don't take off too much. That's always the trick, is you have to test it throughout. Don't just assume that it's going to take off the right amount. So this is basically how to do a facing cut, and then how to do a cut to remove stock off a diameter.